What's up, everyone? How's it going? A bit of a live update. I'm a little busy this month, so till the end of the month, expect that videos will come in more sporadically. Apologies for those of you who are looking forward to more videos, but yeah, uh, I have a lot of food on my plate right now. Anyhow, a successful demo will still go on as planned. It's time to visit my patrons and see what amazing ideas we've had so far. Yeah, awesome criminal cards, Ramen Rai, a card I never expected to cover. I'm sure there are lots of wonderful patrons with wonderful suggestions waiting for me as I'm gonna check my Google Forms here. Rotage. Oh no, this is not gonna end well. Brainstorm! Oh, of course. Oh man, this was a mistake. Mistakes were made. Now I'm forced to do Rotage's dirty work, am I not? Should have put a warning label on this survey beforehand. No Aldershot bullshit. This is terrible. Keyhole! Come on, Rotage, you troll. Okay, fine. I guess we are gonna do it. Welcome to episode negative 3A of Successful Demo. In each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more cards against our will, chosen by sadistic patron supporters. Today's card, brought to you by Rotage, is Brainstorm. Well, I mean, what can I say? It's a Rotage card. No one plays this shit card because guess why? It's a shit card. I mean, Komainu's not a bad card, don't get me wrong. It's a nasty piece of ice with painful subroutines, but Brainstorm's just bad. It costs 9 to res, and it's not even taxing. It's the ultimate swingy card, the ultimate high variance card that most competitive net runners love to hate. I mean, you just get those one or two games after playing 50 games where someone runs without a sentry breaker and you auto win. Is that fun netrunner? Rotage, really? Tell me, is it fun netrunner? No, because if it doesn't fire, it's just crap. You probably don't want to install it 90% of the time. And in the other 10% where you auto win with Brainstorm, did you really have fun? Did you? Did you? Well, all the jokes aside, Komainu and Brainstorm are still worth going through in the theoretical sense because they provide some very interesting advantages and disadvantages compared to most other ice in the game. For one, they gain subroutines on encounter, which is a really interesting mechanic that allows for some interesting interactions. The disadvantages, of course, as you notice, even though they gain subroutines on encounter, they don't actually have subroutines on their own. So there are some subtleties that this is a subtlety that runners can abuse to their advantage. Not to mention that these subroutines do not end the run. So we are going to see how that is another aspect of Komainu / Brainstorm that the runner can exploit to their advantage. Now firstly, how can we take advantage of the fact that Brainstorm gains subs on encounter? Well, if you can force the runner to encounter the same Brainstorm multiple times during the run, the subroutines will multiply. From Rotage's submission, Rotage wonders if it could work with Mumbad City Grid so it gains extra subroutines during the run, and the answer is yes. For those of you not very well versed in netrunner mechanics, here's how it works. The runner declares a run on this 3 ice remote server, where the outermost ice is a Brainstorm. Right? So the runner encounters this Brainstorm, and Brainstorm gains subroutines equal to the number of cards in the runner's hand. For simplicity's sake, we'll assume that the runner begins running with a normal hand of 5 cards, meaning the Brainstorm gains 5 subroutines. Very well, the runner breaks the 5 subroutines and moves on along the merry way, except that Mumbad City Grid triggers, which, when the runner passes a piece of ice protecting this server, the corp may swap the encountered Brainstorm with another ice protecting this server. So what this means is after the runner passes Brainstorm, the corp can switch Brainstorm with any other ice in the same server. What if the corp swaps it with the second ice? Then the runner now encounters the second ice, which is the same Brainstorm that had the 5 subroutines from the previous encounter. On encounter, it gains another 5 subroutines because the runner still has 5 cards in their grip. So 5 existing subroutines plus 5 gained from the on encounter effect triggering a second time means that the Brainstorm now has 10 subroutines. they have to break 10 subroutines. That's pretty nasty. And if you have more ice in the server, this just keeps multiplying. You can do this again. Rinse and repeat. The runner encounters a brainstorm a third time. Suddenly they have to break the ice 15 of its subroutines. That's nasty. Most runners can't afford that sort of money. So if the runner wants to get through your entire server, it's just 3 pieces of ice. They need to fork out the money to break 30 subroutines. Yeah, that's pretty impossible. Of course, this is a pretty best case scenario. You need to have the brainstorm the outside. Mumbad City Grid needs to be set up. It only works on a single server. And even then, runners have many solutions against this. I'm going to present to you 3 ways in which the runners in general can fairly easily counter this strategy, which is why you don't see it in play all that often. The first disadvantage is that if you neuter the on-encounter effect of Brainstorm, it won't gain subroutines, and if it won't gain subroutines, you can't multiply subroutines as you would like. One way to do this is to use Hunting Grounds, which flat out fizzles the Brainstorm on-encounter effect. Femme Fatale, on the other hand, allows you to bypass Brainstorm / Komainu. Now, this is a very nasty interaction because with Femme, you can choose to bypass the ice by paying money equal to the number of subroutines on the ice. But as we discussed, Brainstorm / Komainu have no subroutines. So you can actually bypass Brainstorm and or Komainu for 0 credits with Femme Fatale on your turn, of course. So that's a very nasty interaction, which allows Femme to basically neuter Komainu / Brainstorm altogether. The upshot for the co-op is that these are limited effects. Hunting Grounds only works once per turn, and Femme Fatale only allows you to bypass a single one of those Brainstorms or Komainus out there. Still, these are not counter cards you want to see as the co-op. They make your Brainstorms very sad. The other disadvantage is that there exists a lot of breakers out there nowadays that break multiple subroutines for cheap. We are looking at specifically breakers that say break any number of subroutines, sentry subroutines in particular. So Shrike, Sunny's breaker, is the big culprit here, but there's also Lamb, for example, which only breaks barrier subroutines, but you can make Brainstorm gain the barrier subtype as well. So that's a bit of a problem. Even Lamb can break Brainstorm without having to pay through your nose. And finally, Grappling Hook in pirate decks, that is another thing that can just break Brainstorm and leave the runner richer after the fact. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the breakers that you probably should be most concerned about. The third disadvantage is play related. A smart thing that any runner can do is to run without cards in their grip. Without cards in the grip, Komainu and Brainstorm can't even gain subroutines. They have no teeth. Worse still, for Komainu specifically, if the runner encounters a Komainu during the run, instead of paying through their nose to break 30 subroutines, they can instead choose to drop their entire hand to the first encounter of Komainu. So in this example, let's say the runner, encounters Komainu, it gains 5 subroutines because there are 5 cards in hand, and the runner decides, you know what, the cards in my hand are not important, I need to save money, let's take the 5 net damage and move on. On the second encounter, because the runner now has no cards in their hand, the Komainu will gain no additional subroutines. It will still keep the 5 subroutines from the first encounter, but by not gaining subroutines, this means that it cannot tax the runner out that much. The runner now only needs to break 5 subroutines, and this keeps going on, and then the co-op soon realizes that this wasn't a very taxing server after all. Instead of breaking 30 subroutines, the runner only needed to break 10. The second and third encounter, that's 5 subroutines. The first encounter, they drop all the cards to Komainu. Komainu fires in its entirety. So yeah, they only needed to break 10 subroutines. So a huge discount for the runner, and potentially allows them to get into a server that they wouldn't otherwise. So because of these downsides, this Komainu or Brainstorm and Mumbad City Grid interaction is not all that good. In order for it to work very well, you need to shore up these weaknesses with your deck building. For the first 2 disadvantages, unfortunately, you have to look outside of Brainstorm for solutions. You need to diversify your ice suite such that if the runner is running such counter cards like Bypass, Hunting Grounds, or Strikes, you need to have other ice that these breakers cannot break so easily. That way you can still build a defensive remote server or a central server. Against runners who play smartly by running with 0 cards in grip, your best bet is to build a deck that is very spiky, one that punishes the runner for running with too few cards in hand. To that end, there are lots of cards out there that deal damage during the run. I shall highlight some of the more important ones that you'll see play today. Most importantly is Carter Protocol, a restricted card that is on the restricted list for a reason. Carter Protocol makes it such that if, say, you're running 3 copies of it, that's 9 agenda points out of 20 in your deck that require the runner to have cards in their hand to steal. That's basically half your agendas. If the runner decides to, run with very few cards in their hand, well, they won't be able to steal Carters, meaning that your agenda density, whether it's R&D or HQ, is effectively half because Carter protocols are out of reach for the runner. That's the most important one. There are other, trappy cards like Snare, cards like House of Knives, which is another Patreon suggestion that we'll look at in a future video. And finally, there's also Punitive Counter-Strike that destroys the runner after, if they do steal an agenda off a run. So yeah, damage cards go very well with Komainu and Brainstorm. It effectively turns them into end runs because the runner has to be afraid of running with no cards in hand. Effectively, this means that they are forced to break Brainstorm/Komainu subroutines. So this is how our deck is going to look like. Rotage added an additional suggestion to use Harvester in the deck to ensure that they have a full grip before encountering it. Now, in this day and age where fake news is rampant, we have to be on guard. And note that this particular suggestion from Rotage is a ruse from the Aldershot Labs to make everyone run shit cards in their deck. Public service announcement: don't run shit cards in your deck. Don't play Harvester. It is pretty bad. Don't bother with it. Don't listen to them. They are just spreading false rumors. Now, we are going to splash Brainstorm in Mtiwakundu, which is kind of surprising. You spend 8 influence on 2 copies of Brainstorm. It's 4 influence each. Is it even worth it? Well, in this deck, we are basically increasing the number of effective Komainus in our deck from the 3 copies that we are legally allowed to play to essentially 5 copies because now we have 2 additional Brainstorms. So hopefully this will smoothen out the consistency with which we find our Komainu or Brainstorm into Mumbad City Grid combo. You'll also note that we are playing it in Jinteki simply because most of the cards that punish the runner for running with no cards in hand are in the Jinteki faction, so it only makes sense to play Brainstorm in Jinteki, even though it probably isn't worth it to spend 4 influence. Well, this is meant to be a successful demo. It's not a perfect deck, it's not a fine-tuned or an optimal deck, but we're gonna showcase it anyway to make Rotage happy. Now, this is not the best of opening hands. All ice, no money, so we mulligan into... Well, technically this hand does have ice, it does have money, but yeah, this is not good. 2 SSL endorsements. And no Enderun ice. This is asking for a lot of trouble. So, yeah, better get that HQ iced up manually. We don't know what max this is. It might be on employee strike. You never know. Better not get struck and have 7 agenda points from hands stolen straight away. And we draw into yet another agenda. This is looking really bad for us. So, we immediately pop the NGO front. And then... Well, no, we're not going to pop the NGO front. We are not too worried about our opponent running interdiction here. So we're just going to leave the NGO front running. And, try to score this House of Knives, which we do because our opponent is playing very passively, just setting up the economy. So we are going to get our House of Knives scored here. And we do draw into a Thimble Rig, which is really nice, but we have to discard at the end of our turn. So I'm going to put an SSL endorsement in the bin. The reasoning behind this is that even if our opponent is running a card like Dirty Laundry, they will always target R&D before Archives, so we do not need to worry too much about our SSL endorsement getting stolen. As you notice, this deck does run 1 preemptive action, so hopefully we can draw it before our opponent finds a reason to run Archives. Meanwhile, our opponent installs their safety guard in David. David is a very good card against Mtiwakundu because it protects you against all sorts of nasty big eyes like Shiashi and DNA Tracker. Even though it's only 1 use, it mitigates the face check punishment, which is very important given Mtiwakundu's ability. Now, we do threaten with House of Knives, but our opponent has all the breakers. They don't have paperclip, but we don't have any barriers anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no safe remote. But we're going to try anyway. We are going to try. So we are going to try to score the second House of Knives here. At worst, we are just going to lose one agenda point to our opponent. At best, we'll have two House of Knives tokens, or rather two House of Knives going at the same time, which means our opponent has to run with two extra cards in their hand every time they want to attempt to steal an oboe carter or be safe after a snare. Unfortunately, yes, our opponent does call us out. They do attempt to run our remote here, and there's not much we can do to stop them. They've set up very well with their economy, like 18 credits, so, you know, breaking Cortex Lock with MK Ultra and then a Thimble Rig with the Black Orchestra in their bin is a very easy task. You notice that I purposely ordered my ice this way. I had the choice to install either Thimble Rig or Cortex Lock on my remote, and then use Wekundu's ability to install the other piece of ice. I arranged my server this way because this is the nastier version for my opponent to deal with. If Cortex Lock is the first ice they encounter, they are kind of forced to break it because otherwise it will do 3 net damage because they had 3 free memory. Whereas if Cortex Lock was behind the Thimble Rig, that's worse because they have the option of taking only 2 net damage. So yeah, I wanted to encourage my opponent to spend money to install their breakers as far as possible, which is why I wanted Cortex Lock into the end of run rather than the other way around. Now we do draw into our first subroutine gaining ice. It's a Komainu, and that immediately goes on our remote. You notice that we are not really playing on R&D here. We have no ice there at all, firstly because we can threaten with Wekundu's ability anyway. I mean, we don't have any ice in hand, but our opponent cannot know this. They have no way of knowing this, so we good. We are fine with this. Unfortunately, our opponent's going to run our hand here and again call us out. We don't have ice, we do have an agenda, and they're about to steal it. So they stole an SSL endorsement, which gives us some money. And the nice thing about SSL endorsement is that it gives us the money to land a punitive counter-strike. The question is it worth playing the punitive here? They are bloody rich, and the punitive won't kill them. They are on exactly 3 cards. Had I used the House of Knives token on their HQ run, I might have gotten a kill, but I didn't expect them to end with so few cards in hand. So yeah, missed opportunity there. I chose not to fire the punitive here because even though, you know, it cost me less money to play than it costs my opponent to beat the trace, they are a very rich runner, so I don't think there was any point in playing the economic warfare game. So I let the punitive slide, and as far as I'm concerned, the punitive kill threat is off the table. I don't think we are gonna get a meat damage kill this game. The best we can do is to try to drag our opponent through our remote as much as possible. And one way we're going to do that is by putting Mumbad City Grid in the remote. We now have that assembled. Komainu as the outer ice into Mumbad City Grid in the remote. This should be interesting. Right, this should be interesting. We are now able to get that wonderful combo off. And as far as we can see, our opponent has no way to get past our Komainu easily. No Femme Fatale, no Hunting Grounds. Certainly no strike that we see, so this is looking kind of good. Now our opponent makes a very smart play here. They embezzle into HQ, call ice as the type of card to trash, so that they are more certain that there's no ice in our hand. That's why they could go on R&D to steal our Philotic Entanglement. So that was a very nice play by our opponent there, putting them up to match point. And once again, I did not fire my House of Knives. Yeah, I did, but they are still out of kill range. I would have needed them to be on fewer than 2 cards, and I needed to be kind of on the same credit level as them anyway, which I wasn't. So in order to compensate for being too poor, I'm going to attempt to get an NGO front out here. My opponent, I actually expected them to run my remote, given that they had all the breakers and they had all the money, but instead they chose Maker's Eye on R&D instead. So they're going to run R&D, and I'm just going to pray here that they don't see any agendas. Turns out they really don't. Not too bad. Interestingly though, I ran 3 snares in the deck and they haven't hit a snare at all. I'm really waiting for my ambushes to pay off here. They are not showing up though. Right, so now that our opponent has locked our R&D with Maker's Eye, and now that we've gotten our money from NGO, it's time to actually try to score this oboe carter in the remote. We go for it, and our opponent actually attempts to contest this, but we are going to show off the combo here. I know it's not Brainstorm, I know this is a Brainstorm successful demo, but we couldn't find the Brainstorm. We found two Komainus first, but for all intents and purposes, Komainu is the same as Brainstorm. We are going to swippy swappy them with Mumbad City Grid, and now Komainu threatens with 10 subroutines, 12 subroutines instead of 6, because our opponent began the run with 6 cards in hand. Once they saw the potential of this combo, my opponent was like, nope, I'm not gonna get through this. I'm gonna let you swap the Komainu down, but I'm gonna jack out before encountering the second Komainu. So I'm not gonna let it gain 12 subroutines. I'm gonna just end the run. I can't deal with this remote. You can have that agenda. You're only on one agenda point anyway. I'm gonna prepare for my Levy AR lab access. So that's a smart move from my opponent. And here you see a very interesting interaction, because Thimble Rig, I positioned Thimble Rig to now be the middle ice in the server. What that allowed me to do was that at the start of my turn, I could fire Thimble Rig to swap it with the Komainu, putting the Komainu back on the outside of the server. So this is something amazing that wasn't available when Mumbad City Grid was first printed. One of the weaknesses of Mumbad City Grid was that if you keep sliding your Komainus to the bottom of the server, the runner can then run the server when the Komainu is at the bottom of the server, and it won't be very effective. You want your Komainu to be as far out on the outside of the server as possible for it to be effective. But Thimble Rig allows you to reset the position of your ice such that Komainu is in the most threatening position where it can gain the most subroutines from repeated Mumbad City Grid triggers. So that's amazing. I managed to completely reset my remote at no cost at all, because Thimble Rig is clickless, Thimble Rig is creditless. So that's amazing. Meanwhile, my opponent is pressuring my R&D pretty hard. I think it's time to defend it. The question is, Kakugo or Brainstorm? They have all their breakers out, so, as far as gear checks are concerned, I can't gear check my opponent. Let's put the most expensive ice, the most taxing ice on R&D. That's the Brainstorm. So we put it there, and we put the SSL endorsement back into our deck. We don't want them to run archives, because they could very well dirty laundry archives. You never know. With the ice on R&D now, the only free server really is archives. So my opponent runs R&D here. I can't rest the Brainstorm. I'm 1 credit short. That's because Brainstorm's a crap card that is overpriced. I could have used Untitled ability to install Kakugo on R&D. I chose not to. I would rather reserve the Kakugo as an ice for my remote to use on Untitled ability to stack more ice on my remote. Right, so I keep drawing, and now I'm gonna deliberately take credits here so that I can now threaten Resing Brainstorm. Let's see what our opponent does here. They have one same old thing remaining, but they're not gonna use it. They're just gonna play a Levy AR straight from the hand. So this resets the deck, and it means that I can't really mill them out to win. Typically, if I deal enough net damage in the game, I can potentially deplete my opponent's hit points, get rid of the cards in their stack and their grip. Not this game. There are too many levies to chew through. So we have to rely on our secure remote using Komainu and Mumbad City Grid as the combo, right? Right now we're just waiting for agendas. As soon as we draw an agenda, we're going to jam it in the remote. Our objective is to find a 3-point agenda to jam in the remote before our opponent manages to Maker's Eye an agenda off the top of R&D. So that is something I'm very concerned about. As soon as they draw a Maker's Eye, or as soon as Max mills a Maker's Eye into the bin, they can go for it with the same old thing on their board, and there's nothing much I can do to stop them. They're super rich, so I can't deal with them using just my ice. Now my opponent embezzles here, and embezzles ice, getting a huge return, because this time they were correct. I had ice in my hand and they hit them both. Kakugo and Komainu went in the bin. Ugh, that's not good. That's not good for me at all. I'll need to compensate for this by drawing into my deck with Rashida, which I just drew. So Rashida's definitely going into my server here. I'm just deciding what to do with Thimble Rig. I'm now going to set up my Thimble Rig such that I can reposition my Komainu to be on the outside of the server. So how you do this is, first you put Thimble Rig on the outside of server 1. That will take you 1 turn. And then the next turn, you swap the outside Thimble Rig with a Komainu. That way, your Komainu will now be the outermost ice on the server, and you can slide it all the way down with Mumbad City Grid next time. So now my opponent finally forces me to res the Brainstorm on R&D, which I will happily. and they have to pay 9 credits to break the Brainstorm. They cannot allow any subroutine to fire, unlike Komainu, because brain damage, is actually pretty nasty. You don't want to be losing hand size against this Mtiwakundu deck. So here, on my second turn, I performed the Thimble Rig swap, and now the outer ice on my remote is the Komainu. So this Komainu is going to be very taxing for my opponent. They won't be able to deal with this very easily at all. With 4 ice on the server, an outermost Komainu can gain 4 times the number of subroutines as the number of cards in my opponent's hand. So yeah, that's really good. Now ideally, I'll be shopping for an Obo Carter here. I want my final agenda to be an Obo Carter because it's nearly impossible to steal an Obo Carter behind a Komainu Mumbad City Grid combo. Unfortunately, SSL endorsement is the agenda that shows up soon. I'm thinking of my Thimble Rig trigger here, but we don't get it. No, I haven't drawn the SSL. Yep, here it is. The SSL endorsement came before either of the other 2 remaining Obo Carters in my deck, which was quite annoying. I mean, it's both a good and bad thing. Scoring this SSL will win me the game, but I would much rather it be an Obo Carter that's a lot safer to score, right? So yeah, a bit tricky situation here, but thankfully our opponent doesn't actually run HQ, so we can now actually go for the SSL score. This will outright win us the game. It's pretty hard to give up this opportunity, so install Double Advance over the Marilyn campaign in server 1. You'll notice that I don't shuffle Marilyn campaign. No. What am I doing? I'm drawing cards? What am I looking for? I think I was really digging for an Obo Carter here, thinking that my remote wasn't very safe. And that is true, because as you remember, one of Komainu's downsides is that it doesn't end the run. So if my opponent drops all the cards in their hand and then starts running my remote, there's nothing much I can do to stop my opponent. Sure, I have a House of Knives token, but they can just simply run with 1 card in the hand and break very few Komainu subroutines and still steal my winning agenda. So I needed more assurance, so I put a 5th piece of ice on the remote, and my opponent makes ice into R&D, and I managed to fire a snare. That's interesting. They finally hit one of my snares, and they don't fetch any agendas at all. So now it's go time. They just spent some money clearing tags, breaking the Brainstorm, playing Maker's Eye, and they are now on very few cards. I think this is the opportunity I found. I'm gonna score the SSL here. No, you fool. Of course you score the SSL here. Oh man, I'm so silly. This was a perfect window to score SSL. Instead I'm trying to gain money with NGO Front. What? Yeah, I don't know. This is very questionable. You take a game win when you can, and that was pretty close to a game win if you ask me. So, yeah, I prolonged the game by 1 turn. Every turn I prolong is additional exposure to losing the game, because all they need to do is to access 1 card of R&D, and it could be the game-winning agenda. Alright, you notice I don't shuffle Marilyn back into the deck here, because last turn they play a Maker's Eye, so I want R&D to remain as intact as possible. They're gonna see the same old cards of R&D. And yeah, they don't find any agendas off the top of it. Whereas if I shuffled my deck with Marilyn, they could potentially have found some agendas. So now they're going to run my hand and potentially access the 1 in 5 SSL. This is why I really should have tried to score the SSL here. Thankfully, my opponent missed. So we good. We are not out of the woods yet, but we still have a chance. Alright, we are going to score the SSL for real this time. You notice that I'm not going to use the NGO front here because my opponent has Hacktivist Meeting. If I res the NGO front and get SSL trash due to Hacktivist Meeting, I'll be really sad. So we just got the SSL here. My opponent has no money. They have no cards. They can't contest my remote. They can't run R&D because it's already locked. They already played Maker's Side the last turn, so there are no fresh cards of R&D. There's no agendas in HQ, no agendas in the bin. So this game is pretty much mine unless they find some really cheeky way to get into my remote, or if they make us into R&D as a Hail Mary. Let's see what they do. They have 1 click remaining. They could go into any server of their choice. What will it be? It's a tough decision. It really depends on what cards there are in their hand, but knowing that I have a House of Knives token here and that they only have very limited number of hit points remaining, they are not in a very good position to steal any agendas of R&D. There are 2 Obo Carters and a House of Knives left in R&D. So as long as they end the run with fewer than 4 cards in hand actually, they are not going to be able to steal Obo Carters, even though there are very few cards left in R&D. They are denying themselves 2 of the 3 agendas in R&D if they take too much damage, which they do. They let Brainstorm fire because they're too poor to break the Brainstorm with MK Ultra, and with only 1 hit point. They may access an Obo Carter here, it won't help them. They could only win the game off the single House of Knives left in the deck, which they couldn't find, so I just advanced the SSL for the win. Well, what do you know? We managed to pull out a win out of what seemed like a game that was ours, our opponents to win. They got to match point very quickly, and they got so many repeated accesses of R&D. They were doing the right thing, being very proactive and aggressive on our weaker central. But that's where Brainstorm came in. It slowed down R&D accesses from our opponent. They weren't able to run through every single time, even though there was only 1 ice in the way, because Brainstorm turned out to be super effective against MK Ultra. When your breaking ratio is 3 credits for 2 subroutines, Brainstorm starts looking a bit better. That being said, we have to keep in mind that Komainu could have done the same job for 4 fewer credits. Now I know that because Brainstorm does brain instead of net damage, this could occasionally be relevant. For example, in this game, we saw that when our opponent first face checked the Brainstorm on R&D, they actually had to break every single subroutine, paying 9 credits because they had 5 cards in hand for 5 subroutines. That is a big deal. Against Komainu, an Anarch player might be tempted to just let the entire Komainu fire, because they might have an I've Had Worse in hand that they want to trigger anyway. Or they might just want to let the Komainu fire so that they can get their conspiracy breakers into the bin. But not with Brainstorm. You can't afford to let Brainstorm fire, because losing hand size means that it's that much more difficult to steal Obo Carters and keep afloat against the snares in my deck. What about Mumbad City Grid? Well, of course, we didn't get to play Brainstorm with Mumbad City Grid, but I think the Komainu on the remote aptly shows how good Brainstorm could be as well with Mumbad City Grid, because they kind of have the same functionality. You didn't actually see that much of it in action, in the sense that my opponent didn't run my remote too much, but that just goes to show how epic this combo is and how it can easily lock up a server against a runner that doesn't have the correct breaker against it. After my opponent saw the potential of the Komainu into City Grid combo, they just never bothered running the remote for the rest of the game. I managed to shift my Komainu down 1 position with the Mumbad City Grid, but after that they were like, nope, okay, I can't do this. This remote is impossible, so I'm just gonna focus on R&D for the rest of the game. That just goes to show how powerful this combo is. The fact that you can gain tens and tens of subroutines and force your opponent to break all of them, because if they don't, they can't steal Obo Carters. That's a strong enough reason to play this combo. It's kind of like Surveyor remotes, for those of you who have played enough Netrunner in recent days. They can feel rather impossible at times, and as difficult as Komainu Mumbad City Grid was for my particular opponent, as we mentioned at the start of the video, there are so many counters to this combo, so it's not overpowered by any means. It just flat out punishes runners who are not prepared for it. Now let's move on to combos and Nonbos of Brainstorm. First off, we have Helheim servers. Now this is a combo used by very few people, typically only sadistic people will even have a look at this, but what you can do with Helheim servers is to boost Brainstorm's pathetic 2 strength to astronomical levels. If the runner cannot break the Brainstorm with their sentry breaker, guess what? They're taking a whole load of brain damage. Possibly enough to outright win you the game. What about Nonbo? Well, this one's interesting. Divert power actually seems like one of the... or rather, I should put it the other way. When Divert power came out in Rain and Reverie, Brainstorm seemed like one of the nicest candidates in faction for Divert power, simply because it's a multiple of 3, the rest costs. So if you manage to de-res 3 things with Divert power, Brainstorm can be res for exactly 0 credits. And it also mitigates its weakness. I've harped on Brainstorm being so expensive to res for the entire video. Well, there's a card that mitigates this downside. How can you not love it? Well, the problem is you are trading one downside for another.
While Brainstorm becomes cheap to res, unfortunately, it now no longer has teeth because it's no longer a nasty face check. By pre-resing it, the runner's prepared to deal with the Brainstorm, perhaps also prepared to deal with the upgrades in the remote as well. So they might not run your Brainstorm after all. It might not be as effective as you'd like it to be, simply because they now see it coming and they can take adequate measures to protect themselves against a Brainstorm lockout. So yeah, divert power is best saved for ice that where face checking is not that big a part of the ice. Something like the big Fairchild 4 comes into mind. It only ends the run, but with divert power, it now becomes a very ginormous ice that is tough to deal with. I don't think divert power is that good against with Brainstorm. I wouldn't play the two in the same deck. Well, that's Brainstorm for you. And today, if there's one thing I've learned from making this video, is that our good friend Rotage is able to make other people's life a living hell, even when said people are not playing Netrunner. All they need to do is to just throw a suggestion online, and people will just descend into sheer insanity. Thanks for watching, and happy net running. Goodbye.